Hi guys, it's Ty, and this is my presentation on the term thesis and how we kind of take this simple term for granted and think it's a lot more simpler than what others perceive it to be. And this is me busting the thesis myths. So, to start out, we all know what a thesis is, but pretty much every single definition that I've found all include things saying that the thesis is a sentence or a series of sentences that um, is at the beginning paragraph of your paper. Most of the time, it's stated clearly so that you can understand what stance the writer is taking. It will rarely ever be implied, and it is the heart of the paper, so it is the part that states the argument and ideas and stances that the writer is taking on the paper subject, as well as it being a roadmap that leads the reader around. Um, but there's also the term working thesis, which is actually something that a lot of students may not know about, and is probably something that we should tell them, because a lot of them think that they need a clear um, thesis statement at the beginning of their paper in their rough draft, when really that's what a working thesis is for. A working thesis definition is a basic framework that provides connections and to the ideas that you decide to show to your readers, and will kind of like help guide you to your main idea eventually. It will change as your paper is written, and um, will never stay the same because it is working as you're working on your paper. And it is not meant to stay at the end of the paper because it isn't a clear thesis or a concise thesis. It's just something that is meant, it's like a rough draft, and a lot of students don't actually know about the working thesis. So, the influences of the thesis, a lot of students um, kind of don't really understand the not only the term of this thesis, but the importance of having a good thesis. So a good thesis will influence um, your argument, and it will emphasize your argument and the stance you're taking within your paper and make your paper stronger, along with it determines the structure of your paper, because what they don't know is that once you lay out the points that you're going to make within your thesis, or the stance you're going to make, will determine which order you go in when presenting your information in your paper. So the structure of your paper is determined and in what order you will give your information. And it also clarifies your paper. It They don't know that someone should just as easily read their thesis and understand the meaning of their paper, and kind of get the idea of their paper without having to read like the whole first paragraph. So another thing is, even if they think they can write a thesis, they think it's super easy, but there's ways to effectively writing a thesis. For example, you focus on the placement of it. A lot of times people find it more effectively to put it at the end. Some students find it easier to put it in the middle of their opening paragraph. Placement doesn't really matter, but the placement should make more of an impact and show off your point and your thesis so that people can easily find it. So they don't think about placement. They may not make it specific enough. They might think, I'm going to compare these two items, and that's my thesis. And this is like something I've seen in my own students' work. They don't make it specific enough, and you have to try and tell them, hey, you need to be more specific and state kind of what you're going to be talking about in your paper, and that's effectively writing a thesis. And to make it clear, so easy to read, easy to understand, kind of goes with being specific, because if you make it specific, then you're making it semi-clear, that sort of thing, and that'll help make a good, effective thesis. So some common misconceptions of the idea of the thesis is that it is always required. There are certain, what students don't know is that there are certain essays, like personal essays, that don't need a thesis, because if you're reflecting back on what you're writing and your own personal self, it's kind of hard to put a thesis in. They also think that it must come at the conclusion of the opening paragraph. Once again, placement is the key, and most of the time it doesn't have to come at the end of the opening paragraph. It can come in the middle or the beginning, as long as the placement makes sense for whatever they're writing about. And so that's something that is kind of not clear when talking about the thesis. They believe that it's only one sentence. It will not always be one sentence. Your thesis may be a couple sentences. It may be longer than one sentence. It may be a little short. It's not always just one sentence, though. And they think they must have the perfect thesis statement before writing a paper, something I mentioned before, when really they don't. That's what the working thesis is for. And they believe that they must have 3 points of support. This is one of the biggest ones that I've seen. A thesis statement does not always need 3 points of support. There is more. If you have more than 1 point or more than 3 points, then that's great. You put all your points in there. Or if you're taking a stance on something, have at least your stance in there. But it doesn't need to have just 3 points. You're not limited. They're not limited to 3 points. So let's take a moment, pause the video, and what I kind of want you to do is look up sheets that describe the term thesis for both the college and high school course, and write down the differences you spot in how a high school teaches the thesis and how a college teaches the thesis, and what similarities and differences you spot within those sheets. So what I've found in how it's taught in high school is that it needs to be short and simple, no longer than one sentence. Like we said before, it's not limited to one sentence, and so when students come in for college, they get a whole new explanation on how a thesis is taught, if the thesis was even taught in their high school. And we're sitting here, we're telling them a thesis is not just one sentence. It could be more than one sentence. It can be longer. They're always told it's limited to one main idea. I've had some people tell me that they were told the 3 points. once again, a thesis is not just limited to one main idea. And we're sitting here, we're telling them, hey, this is not the correct way that it's correct definition of a thesis. The thesis is this. So that can lead to some confusion on the term and how to effectively use a thesis and how to effectively create one. They are taught it's a declarative sentence with no qualifiers, and that's the down at the bottom is the website that I found for high school English lessons that I pulled some of the information from for the thesis statement lesson plan. And that is my thesis myth busted. If you have any questions about that, then go ahead and leave them in the comments below. Bye.